This Notebook LM video explores how both the prophets of the Old Testament and Jesus himself directly confronted corrupt religious authorities. From Ezekiel's powerful metaphor of leaders as selfish shepherds to Jesus' devastating image of whitewashed tombs, the Bible consistently condemns leaders who exploit power, neglect the vulnerable, and prioritize rituals over true faith.
Welcome to The Explainer. So let's talk about something that feels like it's pulled right from today's headlines, but is actually an ancient struggle. What happens when power corrupts?
This isn't some new problem we just came up with. It's a fundamental conflict, a tension between having authority and having integrity that you see echoing through some of the world's oldest texts.
And when you dig into the source material, you find a really powerful and consistent theme. It's not a quiet suggestion, it's a direct, often fiery challenge to corrupt authority.
All right, so let's jump right in and unpack the core problem as it's laid out in both the Old and New Testaments.
And this isn't a one-off thing. Across both parts of the Bible, you see this clear pattern of leadership failure, and it gets met with really consistent and direct condemnation.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. These specific complaints, the actual charges, stay remarkably consistent over hundreds of years. I mean, just take a look at this comparison. It's pretty striking, right? The critiques from the ancient prophets, and then, much later, from Jesus himself, they're almost identical. We're talking greed, ignoring the vulnerable, and focusing on hollow rituals instead of real faith. You've got the prophet Ezekiel, right? We're talking centuries before Jesus, and he's calling out leaders for just looking out for number one and totally neglecting their people. That metaphor is just so potent. Leaders are supposed to be shepherds caring for the flock, but instead they're just feeding themselves.
And then, fast forward a few hundred years, and you see Jesus using almost the exact same kind of language to call out the leaders of his time. It's the same fundamental accusation. You look great on the outside, but you're rotten on the inside.
This metaphor, the whitewashed tombs, wow. It was such a devastating image because it perfectly captured that disconnect between looking pure and righteous, but having a core that's morally decayed. It's all about image over integrity.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just about harsh words. The critique didn't stop there. It escalated from verbal condemnation to direct and pretty dramatic action. Think about this scene. Jesus doesn't just, write a strongly worded letter. No, he walks into the temple, the very center of religious authority, and physically challenges the corrupt system the chief priests had set up. He's flipping tables, chasing out merchants. This was a full-on, public act of defiance.
So what's the crucial point here? He's not just hinting at a problem, he's accusing them, right in public, of turning a place of worship into a marketplace of exploitation. He's calling out the systemic corruption of a sacred institution. And this wasn't just about the money. It went deeper. It was about principles being twisted. Jesus was also taking on the rigid, religious rule-following of the establishment, basically arguing that human compassion and justice should always come before empty traditions that have lost their heart.
Okay, so you've got this powerful critique of the old guard. What's the alternative? Well, in response to all this corruption, the early Christian movement came up with a really radical new idea for what leadership should actually look like.
So instead of looking for the richest person or the one with the most power, the focus completely flips. It becomes all about moral character. It's not about what you have, but who you are. And notice how many of these are a direct answer to those charges of greed and hypocrisy we were just talking about.
And this part is absolutely crucial. This wasn't some top-down decree. A leader couldn't just be appointed from on high. They had to be validated from the ground up by the very community they were supposed to lead. The people's voice was essential.
So what you end up with is this really smart system of checks and balances. A leader needed a few things to happen. They needed the approval of existing authorities, they needed the buy-in from their own local community, and then they needed formal recognition. It was a three-part system designed to build an accountability from every angle. All right, so after looking at all this historical pattern of challenge and reform, what's the big picture here?
You see, this is way more than just a history lesson. It's a dynamic that keeps playing out again and again in all kinds of institutions, whether they're religious or not. That struggle between authority and integrity is just a constant part of the human story.
And so, this whole narrative leaves us with a challenge, doesn't it? It pushes us to ask ourselves, how do we stand up to hypocrisy and demand integrity in our own world? How do we make sure that our modern-day shepherds are actually taking care of the flock? And that's definitely something worth thinking about.